Once Gunnar Henderson gets himself ready, could this Oriole infield be pretty much set for the 2025 season? We'll talk about that and preview the O's infield coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we will continue our Orioles positional preview series. Last week or so, we went over the catcher, first base, and DH episode. We did our outfield episode. Today, we finished with the hitters, previewing the Orioles infield for 2025. What will the O's do if Gunnar Henderson misses some time? Is Jackson Holliday ready to fill in fully every single day at second base? And what is the bench going to look like for the infield, especially when Jorge Mateo gets healthy as well? But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So we are previewing the Orioles infield. This is our third of 5 preview episodes, position by position, to get you ready for the season. As I mentioned over the last week or two, already did catcher, first base, and DH as one episode. We did the outfield as another. Make sure to go back and check those out. Today will be infield, and if the plan goes all to plan, tomorrow is starting rotation, and the Thursday episode is on the bullpen to finish up these positional previews. But today it's the infield. And we will begin with the main starters, kind of how we split these things. The main starters, the bench and the depth, and then the prospects who could be in the mix. And starting with the main starters, obviously once he's good to go, Gunnar Henderson is once again an MVP candidate. Gunnar, who finished 4th in AL MVP voting last season, has a chance to do a similar thing again. Now, we are still TBD about whether or not he will be ready for opening day. He is recovering from a mild intercostal strain, one of the kind of midsection muscles, something he's dealt with a little bit in a similar spot with the oblique he had last spring, but was ready to go for opening day. And Gunnar right now, the last update we got from Brandon Hyde was on Monday before the Orioles spring training game. He said that Gunnar has continued to hit in the cage. He's doing infield drills defensively on the field, but he's not quite ready to get into spring training game action again. When we heard from Gunnar himself over the weekend, he said he's feeling good. He's progressing. He's feeling much, much better than when the injury happened a couple of weeks ago. And he feels he can be ready for opening day. Now, the decision is going to be on the training staff and Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias, but at least positive signs we're hearing. The O's are going to be careful, though. You'd rather be without Gunnar for an extra 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of the season to make sure this doesn't become some sort of lingering issue or injury throughout the year. So keep that in mind. I kind of feel 50-50 right now, whether or not he's on the opening day roster. If he's not, it's probably a minimum 10-day IL stint, and then he's back in there in early April. So either way, we're going to get a lot of Gunnar Henderson this year. And once he is healthy, he is the everyday shortstop. Fangraphs had him as about a 6 to 7 WAR player on their projection for this year. I mean, he was an 8 WAR player last year. So if he plays shortstop every day, mostly hits first, maybe hits a little bit second or third or fourth in the lineup, but mostly going to hit first. I mean, he hit 37 home runs last year at a 155 WRC plus. If he can hit 30 plus homers, steal 20 plus bags again, I mean, he stole 21 last year and is looking to run more this season, a 150 WRC plus. And also his defense was maybe a tick above league average at shortstop last year. I think that can certainly take a step forward. He's just 23 years old. You got to remember that. He's not some grizzled veteran. This is going to be his 3rd full season at the big league level. Like, he is a special player. I think he could easily get back to an 8 WAR season. I think he could easily be in the mix to win MVP this year. That is how good Gunnar Henderson is. He is going to be full stop a top 10 player in Major League Baseball this year as long as he is healthy. And that's why it's so important to just be careful with this intercostal strain. Make sure he is fully 110% ready to go before they get him back on the field. Again, even if it is starting the year on the IL, it won't be too long until we see Gunnar back in that Oriole lineup. Now, Jordan Westburg is also going to be back in that lineup. He was dealing with a bit of a back issue this spring after a tough mattress in his Airbnb, but he got that straightened out. He's back in spring training games, and it's going to be good to go for opening day. And for Westburg, he's another main starter, most likely at third. He's going to play some second base again this year, but I think there will be more time at third base for Jordan Westburg this year than there has been since he came to the big leagues about midway through the 2023 season. And he's going to try to get back to the All-Star game. He was somewhat surprising to some people, an All-Star player, and made the All-Star team in the American League in 2024. He was incredible when he was on the field. He had a 125 WRC plus in those 107 games he played last season, but he broke his hand in late July, took a pitch to the hand. He was out for almost 2 months, and the Orioles offense just was not the same without Jordan Westburg. We have documented well the slump the Orioles went into in the second half. Most of that was without Westburg until he returned in mid to late September and then was on the postseason roster, but it was kind of too little too late at that point. Now, he does have a pretty high swinging strike rate, but it only led to about a 22% strikeout rate, which isn't too bad. It's something you can certainly work with. And he still hits the ball hard. He has such a good approach. He's going to be in there every day. And again, I'm not 100% sure what the split will be for him between third and second. I mean, he could play some shortstop early in the year. If Gunnar is on the injured list, Westburg started a game at short last year. He played shortstop at Mississippi State. He came up through the system as a shortstop and then was moved to third and second. He could do it. I think he's going to start at least one game at all three of those infield positions this year. I think the biggest question is it more third? Is it more second? I would say we're going to see him more at third base as his home, because I do think, as we'll talk about, the main lineup is going to be Westburg at third, Henderson at short, and Jackson Holliday at second. Now, in the past, like even when Ramon Arias would be in this lineup, and we know he's going to, we would think, be a part of this opening day roster and be a part of this team. When it used to be lineups last year with Arias, Westburg, and Henderson, you would see Arias at third and Westburg at second with Henderson at shortstop. Now, this spring, they've aligned both ways, which is good. They've done the old, which is Arias at third. They've also done some of the new with Westburg at third and Arias at second. And that made sense for a while because Ramon Arias won the Gold Glove at third base in the American League in 2022. Like, he was a pristine third base defender, but that was 2022. That has kind of fallen off since then for Arias. He's still a solid defender, and I still trust him at both third and second base if he is out there. But the numbers show at this point, Arias is clearly a better defender at second than he is at third. You break it down, outs above average is kind of the StatCast-based defensive metric. Jordan Westburg was a +5 outs above average last year at third base. 0 is league average, +5 is really good. He was a -7 at second base. That is not good at all. That's a guy you probably don't want to play at that position. Ramon Arias, meanwhile, was around a 0. He was basically league average, maybe a touch above at second base. Totally fine to play him there. And he was a -10 at third base last year. So you look at those things, and honestly, the eye test is starting to push me that way as well. It's just like, it makes too much sense that if you're going to have days, and you could have these days, especially against left-handed starting pitchers early in the year, where maybe Holliday sits and you get Ramon Arias into the lineup because he was good against lefties last year. It just makes too much sense for the defensive alignment. Westburg at third, Henderson at short, Arias at second, and then it's easy for Westburg to stay at a position. I love that Jordan Westburg is versatile. It helps out the team that he can play third, second, shortstop whenever you need him to. That is great for this roster. But it's also nice to have one of your young stars, and a guy who made an all-star team last year, know what his position is going to be 9 times out of 10 when he gets written into the lineup. I think it helped Gunnar Henderson. When he first came up, he was playing some second, that he was moving between third and shortstop in 2023. I think it really helped Gunnar last year that it was just like, hey, when you're in the lineup, you are going to be at shortstop no matter what. And I think it would help Westburg if Brandon Hyde said, if you're in the lineup most of the time, you are going to be at third base instead of switching between third and second. I think that would be good for him. And then whether you want to play Holliday or Arias, you just play that guy at second base, whoever is in the starting lineup. I think that's just going to be better for everyone moving forward. And then the final guy I'd throw in the main starter group, you could argue that he's not there yet, but I'm going to put Jackson Holliday in there. I think, and this is not going to happen from day one this season, but I think at some point in 2025, Jackson Holliday will kind of take over the role of being the true everyday second baseman for the Orioles. Now, Holliday is someone else who may have to play some shortstop early in the year. Quite frankly, I think if Gunnar Henderson does start the season on the IL, I think it'll be more so Holliday than Westberg who gets those reps at shortstop. Maybe if the OC a lefty and they sit Holliday, that's when Westberg goes to short. But otherwise, I think Holliday's more recently played the position. That's what he was drafted as. And I know he's focused on second base, but I think the Orioles may have a touch more trust in Holliday than Westberg at shortstop. I think Holliday's played a little more short than Westberg in spring since Gunnar went down. So I see them moving that direction a little bit. But once again, 2 weeks into the season, hopefully, and Gunnar's good to go and back in the lineup, I see Jackson Holliday at second base. And obviously it was not the best start to his big league career in 2024. He certainly had his struggles, but he's adjusted with the toe tap and the new stance. He's gotten faster. He's gotten stronger. He just seems better prepared for the big leagues heading into 2025. I don't think there's a question about him being on the opening day roster. He's got a spot right there that is his. I think the question is, how much does he play? How many times do you write him into the lineup? I'm of the opinion that at least at the beginning of the year, when there is a right-handed pitcher on the mound, the opposing starting pitcher, which you see more times than not. Again, the Orioles played 162 games last year and saw, I believe it was 43 left-handed starters. So they saw way more right-handed starters. When it's a righty, Jackson Holliday is in the starting lineup playing second base. Of course, when Gunnar is in there at shortstop, when Gunnar is not early in the year, if that is the case. But I want Holliday in there against the righties. Against the lefties, I think you could move it around. And we'll talk about this in a bit, but Holliday was not good against left-handed pitching last year. I mean, that is just simply what happened, and we'll get to that. But Arias was good against left-handed pitching. So I do think early in the year, you could platoon them somewhat, where Arias steps in at second against lefties. But at some point, Holliday is going to be the player that's going to show, hey, I'm going to play against lefties too. I'm going to be in there every single day, no matter what. And in a perfect world for the Orioles, they get to a point, maybe it takes till June or July or second half or whatever it is this year, that as long as no one needs a day off or no one's banged up, Brandon Hyde opens up the lineup card and puts Holliday at second, Henderson at short, Westberg at third, no matter what, and doesn't have to think about it twice, and then fills out kind of the rest of the lineup below that. And again, like Holliday can hit low in the lineup. You can kind of see where it goes this season. Really no pressure on him to produce, but I think he is ready to take that step forward and be a productive hitter in the big leagues this year. I know he's only 21, but he is a special, special talent. Do not let a small sample size of a 20-year-old struggling in the big leagues cloud your view of him. He was the number one prospect in baseball for a reason, and I think he is ready to take that next step and at the very least be a solid, productive big leaguer here in 2025. But those are the three main starters. The Orioles certainly not the same amount of infield depth they used to have, kind of a different kind of infield depth, but they do have depth behind them. So we'll talk about the guys who are also going to make the team, and then who's going to be in AAA Norfolk being ready in case an injury happens. And also, speaking of injuries, what are the Orioles going to do when Jorge Mateo is healthy? We'll get to all of that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Just Ingredients. When it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients is also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF-certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. So whether you're recovering after a workout or need an energy boost, their grass-fed whey protein and pre-workout can deliver real results. So just visit justingredients.com/Bryce Harper and use code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off your order. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients on Instagram. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money, it isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And you don't have to juggle multiple apps anymore. You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And you can track shared and personal accounts. You can set your goals. You can stay on the same page with others in your life without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. So for the 2025 Orioles infield preview, we move to the bench and depth options. And we begin with the one guy on this list I am very sure is going to be on the opening day roster, and that is Ramon Urias, who certainly proved his importance to this team in 2024. I mean, it feels like Urias, maybe since the end of the 2022 season, since Gunnar Henderson got promoted right at the end of the 2022 year, even though Urias was good that year and won the Gold Glove, that's when the conversation started lurking a little bit. Like, what is the future for Ramon Urias with the Orioles? Came over on waivers from the Cardinals in 2020, debuted that year, played an important part in 2021 and for most of 2022. But then going into 23, it was like, all right, we've got Gunnar, we've got Adam Frazier on the team, and we're going to call up Jordan Westburg this year. And it was kind of like, Jorge Mateo is on this team. It was kind of a Mateo versus Urias thing was happening for a while. I think first and foremost, Urias has showed us he is the correct choice if you had to choose between him, and the Orioles might have to do that this year. And also, Urias has showed why the Orioles have kept him around so long, even though he is no longer an everyday starting player that he was for this team during the rebuild. He had a 115 WRC plus last year. Like, Ramon Urias was a 15% better than league average hitter. It's pretty astounding. And when Jordan Westburg went down with the broken hand, Urias was incredible. In July and August, Ramon Urias, in 137 plate appearances, hit 291 with a 387 on base and a 504 slugging. That is a 157 WRC plus for Urias in that pivotal 2-month stretch for the Orioles. He was fantastic. And again, the defense is not what it was. He is no longer a Gold Glove level third baseman. I think we all kind of know that. But you can still put him at third. You can still put him at second. Feel good with it. And if you absolutely have to, he could play short. And he's played first base at the big leagues before. He could do that for you in a pinch if you needed it. Is the perfect versatility to be a utility infielder on your bench. The only thing he doesn't have is speed. Mostly utility infielders have some speed. He does not have speed, but he's got everything else in his game. And last year he added something new, the ability to hit left-handed pitching. Urias for a while had been kind of a reverse splits guy. As a right-handed hitter, he had been much better against right-handed pitching. And that's never a bad thing because you always are going to see more righties than you see lefties on the mound. So it's good to be better against righties. But for the role he now plays on the team, it was making his roster fit weird if he couldn't hit lefties. Last year, he turned that around. He had a 140 WRC plus against left-handed pitching last year. He was fantastic against lefties and could fall in as a perfect platoon player / utility guy for this team. And again, as I said, if everyone is healthy, I see Westburg and Henderson in there every single day, and then Jackson Holliday in there against righties. But against lefties is where Urias could truly step into this equation. Now, it's interesting because Jackson Holliday was not good against left-handed pitching last year. He was essentially unplayable against lefties, but he was 20 and he was dealing with a lot of things. The Orioles hope that at some point this season, as I mentioned, he becomes the everyday second baseman and he's in that spot for a long, long time for the O's. And to do that, he's going to need to be able to hit. You don't have to hit lefties as well as you hit righties, but still hit lefties at a solid clip. And that's going to take some steps up from what we saw in his first year in the big leagues last year. And we know he's going to take step forwards in many directions. So I'm not worried that he's going to be able to do that at some point, but the Orioles are also trying to win every single game and trying to put the best lineup out there to win every game. So it's going to be an interesting decision-making process for Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias in the front office when they're putting together these lineups early in the year, especially once Gunnar Henderson is healthy and in there every day at short. If you're assuming Westburg at third, like, what do you do at second base every day with Urias and Holliday? You could do a straight-up platoon. You have Holliday in there against righties. He was, despite being bad offensively last year, he was actually better than league average against righties. He was just so bad against lefties that his stats looked pretty bad at the end of the year. Urias was 40% better than league average against lefties. So it's kind of a perfect combo where You get Holliday a lot more at-bats because you're going to see way more righties than lefties. He plays against the righties. And Arias steps in against the couple of lefties you're going to see and gives you a nice platoon advantage. And then later in the game, when a righty reliever comes in, you just pull Jackson Holliday off the bench, pinch hit him for Arias, and keep him in there for the rest of the game because he still also gives you really good defense at second base. That sounds pretty good to me. The issue with that is you have to balance, well, we still feel right now Arias is a better hitter against lefties than Holliday. I wouldn't be surprised if that is still the case. But we also want Jackson Holliday to get chances against lefties because at some point he's going to be our everyday second baseman and need to face lefties. So how do you balance that where Arias is giving you a better shot right now, but you need Holliday in there to make sure he's ready moving forward to be an everyday player? My plan would be early in the year, let's say April and May, first 2 months of the season. Most of the time, Arias is in there against a lefty with Holliday on the bench and coming off as a pinch hitter. But maybe 2/3 of the starts against lefties go to Arias and 1/3 goes to Holliday. And you just see how it goes over the first 6 weeks to 2 months of the year. As long as Holliday's at-bats are looking better and more comfortable against lefties and the rest of the lineup is producing well enough that you can maybe hide Holliday in the 8 or 9 spot in the lineup against a lefty, then once you get to late May into June, you start to expand Holliday's role against lefties. Okay, he's playing half the time. Okay, he's playing a little more than half the time. And by the time we get beyond the All-Star break and into the second half, it should be flipped where Jackson Holliday's playing against 2/3 of the lefties. And yeah, he's getting some of his off days against lefties, and you're getting Arias in there when you can to give maybe some other guys some off days, but Holliday starts to transition in. And if Holliday really still is struggling against lefties, you still have Arias to throw back in there and give yourself the best lineup to try and win games. It's going to be a really interesting balance for these two guys. But either way, Arias is going to be part of this team, even if his playing time goes down as the season goes on because the O's are healthy and Holliday's getting more and more chances. That's the goal, right? You want Holliday to be in there every day. He's a better talent long-term than Ramon Arias is, but Arias is still a perfect backup plan. Perfect. So he gets, throughout the year, 50 starts maybe, and you spread them out around off days and lefties and all that good stuff. And again, if Gunnar Henderson is on the injured list, Arias is in there every day to begin the year, you're probably looking at Westberg at third, Holliday at short, Arias at second every single game. So that's going to be good for him to get those at-bats as well. But even if he's not getting regular ABs later in the year when Holliday really steps up, hopefully, he's ready to step in, Arias is, at any time for an injury. And that is why it's great to keep him on this team to be the perfect utility infielder, which brings us to really the big question here. What are the Orioles going to do with Jorge Mateo? He is coming off Tommy John surgery to his non-throwing arm that he had in August. Mike Elias kind of said all offseason, hey, Mateo's going to be a big part of our team this year, but he's probably not going to be ready for opening day. He appeared in a spring training game for the first time on Sunday, so just a couple of days ago. Mateo said he thinks he could be ready for opening day, but Brandon Hyde has now said it is doubtful, and I think signs are pointing to Mateo's going to be on the injured list to begin the year, but he might be ready earlier than we thought. I thought sometime in May, maybe he'd be back. It could be April that Mateo is ready to go. And that is where a really interesting conversation comes in here. Because for Jorge Mateo, he wasn't good last year. He had a 68 WRC plus in 208 plate appearances. Now, he did his job in hitting lefties. It was a 127 WRC plus against lefties, so he was still very good in that platoon. Still has elite speed, plays good defense. He can play second, short, third, and he showed he could potentially play the outfield. That makes him more versatile. But you look at this roster and you think, where is Mateo's spot right now? Again, he's in games now. He's getting closer and closer to being ready. But let's say Mateo is ready on, I don't know, May 1st. Let's say it's May 1st. Let's say the Orioles really slow play it. He's ready on May 1st. Now, there's a chance that on May 1st, someone else is injured, right? There's always the chance that's the case, and you just slot him in there, and then you kick the can down the road. And guys get injured. People always say these things tend to work themselves out, and generally they do, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes you need to make a tough decision. And there could be a time we get to May where the Orioles have to make a tough decision where everybody on this team is healthy, or I guess not, or more so, and is healthy and playing well enough to keep their spot, right? Ramon Laureano's doing a great job as the fifth outfielder. He's hitting lefties. Heston Kjerstad is swinging the bat well. Jackson Holliday is looking really comfortable. Ramon Arias is filling his role perfectly. And you're kind of looking around and you're like, everybody's doing what they need to do. And that might not be the case. Laureano might be terrible. Holliday might struggle really badly. Kjerstad might struggle really badly. Those are opportunities to, option one of the two young guys or DFA Laureano and get Mateo back onto the roster. That's certainly possible. But the way the Orioles have built this roster, I think the plan would be, if no one's hurt, Mateo's not one of the 13 best hitters. And maybe if they're in a good spot pitching-wise, they could option a pitcher and hold a 14th hitter for Mateo. But I don't think you want to take one arm out of your bullpen just to give Jorge Mateo a bench spot. That doesn't seem like great roster management. So otherwise, I think Jorge Mateo has a chance to be designated for assignment before he plays a game for the Orioles in 2025. There's a scenario where he's ready to go May 1st. Maybe he's exhausted some, rehab stint time in AAA Norfolk, and he has to be activated to the roster. And the Orioles just look around and say, we're better everywhere else. We'll try out waivers. Hopefully you clear waivers and we can keep you in the org in AAA Norfolk and call you up when we need you later in the year. I know some people would be upset by that who love Mateo. Some people would be ready for it to happen like 2 years ago, but this seems to be the year where that's going to happen. And Mateo, they did put an option on his contract. He was set to become a free agent after this year. The Orioles could choose, if they keep him around, to have him for 2026 as well. But he's either way, he's still getting closer to free agency. And he's becoming a little less and less valuable as better players take his spot on the roster. And now with the injury, it's making it a little bit worse. I just think there's a chance that they just cut him loose before he even plays this year, because the Orioles have improved the depth on this roster to where they got players with higher ceilings and honestly higher floors than Jorge Mateo has. And that does not spell great things for Mateo. Now, the other question about the bench and the depth is, what would the O's do on that bench if Henderson is on the IL? We talked about the starting lineup. It would be Westburg at third, Holliday at short, Arias at second, but you still have an open roster spot if Gunnar Henderson starts the year on the injured list. And I think there are really three main ways the Orioles could go here. Now, I do want to mention Ramon Arias is dealing with a bit of a sore hamstring right now, though the Orioles are planning on getting him back into spring games later this week. So as long as that happens, they're not super worried. They think he'll be fine to go for opening day, but that's something to mention. But if Henderson is on the IL, I really think there's three guys in the mix here. It's Luis Vazquez, Livan Soto, and Vimeo Machine seem to be in this mix. Soto, non-roster invitee, was with the Orioles last year. 24-year-old left-handed hitter, can play second, short, third, and corner outfield. No power really for Soto, but he's got good plate discipline, good bat-to-ball skills. He's a really slick defensive second baseman. Not as good at short, but he can still certainly play the position. For Vazquez, also a non-roster invitee at this point, 25-year-old right-handed hitter. Really doesn't play the outfield, but does play short, second, and third. Played 11 games with the Cubs last year to make his debut before coming over to the Orioles. He's got more pop in his bat than Soto. He had 20 home runs in the minors in 2023. It's a good approach. The plate goes oppo a lot. His swing kind of looks like Joey Ortiz. He's also an elite defensive shortstop like Joey Ortiz. I'm partial to Luis Vazquez, and then Vimeo Machine is more of a journeyman guy who's in the Mexican League, who's like hitting almost 450 this spring. That's kind of why he's on this list, but he's not really a shortstop. So I think if Gunnar went down, it wouldn't be Machine. It would be Soto or Vazquez, because they can play shortstop if you needed them to. I would personally go with Luis Vazquez. Both guys have minor league options, so you wouldn't worry about losing them. You'd put them on the roster, then just send them to AAA. I think Vazquez is a better player, but because Soto hits lefty and Vazquez hits righty and Henderson's a lefty, I think there would be a slight possibility they would lean towards Soto to get another lefty on the roster. But also you can make this argument, hey, if the Orioles really don't want to play Jackson Holliday against lefties early in the year, and if Gunnar Henderson's out, your infield is going to be Westburg, Holliday, Arias, and you want to sit Holliday against the lefties, you could just play Luis Vazquez as a righty at shortstop along with Westburg and Arias, and that can make it a little bit easier. I think they're probably leaning Soto, but I would rather see Luis Vazquez. He has been one of the players that has impressed me most so far here in camp. And then the rest of the depth the Orioles had, just a lot of guys coming in on non-roster invitee deals, because the Orioles have traded away a lot of their infield depth over the past couple of years, right? With the Daryl Hernandez and the Connor Norby trades, and just they don't, or a lot of players have already graduated to the big leagues, obviously. And, we'll talk about Coby Mayo. He doesn't seem like he's quite ready to go yet. Emmanuel Rivera maybe in this group, but he's got a bit of a shoulder issue he's dealing with right now. But you do have these guys like that they brought in, Nick Gordon and Jeremiah Jackson and Terrin Vavra and Franklin Barreto, along with Rivera and Machine and Soto and Vazquez, who all could get the call at some point this year because most of them, if not all of them, have major league experience. And it's a nice kind of depth to have. You got those guys at AAA who they can fill in a bench role for a spat if you need them to. And that'll be nice for the Orioles roster whenever injuries do pop up at some point this year. So that's all the depth. Let's talk about the prospects again. Not the prospect pool it once was in the Orioles infield, but still some interesting players to talk about to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's at supplyhouse.com. So we finish things up here looking at the prospects. And listen, a lot of these guys who stacked this prospect list for the Orioles are just not here anymore because they're either not prospects or they've been traded away. Like some of them have debuted, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westburg, Jackson Holliday, Coby Mayo. Some have been traded, Joey Ortiz, Connor Norby, Daryl Hernandez, Mac Horvath. Coby Mayo is the one name here. Now, we already talked about him on the first base catcher DH preview because the Orioles maybe see him more as a first baseman than a third baseman moving forward, but third base has been his primary position. There's not a spot for him on the opening day roster right now. He has definitely struggled in camp. He certainly struggled at his first chance at the big leagues last year. I mean, even if Gunnar Henderson starts the year on the IL, the O's would want a short-term replacement, and it would be someone who could play shortstop. That's why I talked about Holliday moving to short, and then Livan Soto or Luis Vazquez being the roster replacement. Just Coby Mayo is not a guy who's going to play short. He doesn't fit that short-term role. I think he just needs a little more seasoning in AAA, and that's okay. Some guys need more time back in the minor leagues, and I think that's what the Orioles need. And even if they needed a third baseman early in the year, like say a back issue cropped up again for Jordan Westburg, they'd probably just play Arias at third, wait for Henderson to get back, and then I think there's a chance they would call up Emmanuel Rivera again, as long as his shoulder's okay, over Coby Mayo. Just if it were a short-term thing and Rivera produced well for the Orioles last year, he's still here. Like, I think if they're going to call up Mayo this time, it's going to be a spot where he can get some regular at-bats and really fall into the mix. I still think he's certainly a piece who's going to be in the mix and make an impact for the Orioles in 2025. He's still got amazing talent. He is still the number 2 prospect in the system. He's still a consensus top 15 prospect in all of baseball. This is still a really, really good player, but major league pitchers are exposing his weaknesses at the plate, and he swings through a lot of breaking balls. We've seen it in spring training. We saw it in the big leagues last year. It's something he's going to continue to work on. He's still young. He is still uber talented. Again, as I talked about with Jackson Holliday, it's not time to give up on a guy in his early 20s who has one small sample size stint in the big leagues and struggles. He's got plenty of time to get better. That is what this is all for. That's why you bring in so much depth, so you don't have to rely on Coby Mayo while he's still kind of struggling at this young age. But I also do think that if the Orioles are going to go get a pitching upgrade and someone like Sandy Alcantara of the Marlins is on the table, I don't think the Orioles are going to trade Samuel Basallo. So Coby Mayo becomes your next best option. And a package surrounded around Coby Mayo sending to Miami sounds like something that would maybe work out for both sides. And that's potentially further down the line when the Marlins are willing to trade Alcantara, but it's something to think about this year. Now, otherwise, for the infielders, you've got some guys who are not really major league ready quite yet. I mean, Max Wagner might be the closest one. Second round pick in 2022, was really bad in Double-A last year and then got hurt. Griffo Farrell is the highest ranked one, 32nd overall pick in the draft last year by the Orioles, right-handed hitting shortstop, kind of Jordan Westberg molded kind of guys, top 10 prospect in the system most places. He was okay in 90 plate appearances between Delmarva and Aberdeen after the draft, but he's like a ETA of 2027 guy, not really in the mix right now. And then, there's some interesting young guys. Frederick Bencosme, a 22-year-old at Double-A with a really good hit tool. Leandro Arias, 20-year-old in High A. You saw him have the walk-off in the spring breakout game on Saturday. You got like Elvin Garcia and Emilio Sanchez, two teenage infielders in the Dominican Summer League who could be kind of the next wave of really good international prospects for the Orioles. But you talk about all that and the guys who aren't here anymore. Like, this is why it was so important for the Orioles to bring in the V-Mail machines and keep the Levon Sotos and the Luis Vazquez and Franklin Barretos and the Nick Gordons and the Terran Vavras of the world this offseason. Not necessarily to play big roles on the MLB team. That would have been their role if this were still 2019, but it's not anymore. This is a team trying to win a World Series this year. These guys are there because they basically all have MLB experience at some point. They can all sit there in Double-A Bowie, Double-A Chesapeake and Triple-A Norfolk, and they can fill spots. They can come up for a week or two if you need it because they have big league experience. They can just fill the depth in Double-A and Triple-A because the Orioles infield prospects, they're no longer there. The highest level a couple of them are at is Double-A. There's really nobody prospect-wise who's in Triple-A in the infield right now. So they need those guys to be in Triple-A to not just fill out a roster down there, but be the guys they can call on if there is a need at the big league level. And next year, they probably won't have as many of those guys because maybe O'Farrell or Wagner or Bencosme or whoever to be, like, those guys will start creeping up towards Triple-A and be a little more big league ready. But right now, I think that was a good job. Again, another piece of Mike Elias building the depth of this team and this system this offseason is knowing there was a hole, kind of a gap in the prospect wave, infielders in Triple-A, and he brought in kind of some interesting pieces who could help you. One of them could pop. Good job, I think, this offseason filling into that infield depth. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps the show. And also, if you could like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, that would help tremendously. Also, if you have thoughts on the infield, like, what would you do at second base to begin the season between Jackson Holliday and Ramon Arias, assuming Gunnar Henderson's healthy? Would you just play Holliday every day? Would you mix Arias in against how many lefties? How would you play it out? I want to know in the comments. Also, I want to know, like, who would you put on the roster if Henderson is injured? Who would you play at shortstop? Would you give a spot to Soto or Machine or Vazquez or whomever it may be? And then thoughts on Coby Mayo. I want to know those two. Like, what do you think the O's will do with Coby Mayo? And what do you think the O's will do with Jorge Mateo when he comes back? A lot of infield questions. I want to know your thoughts here in the YouTube comments section. The positional previews, though, they do continue. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, we move to the pitching side. Probably the biggest question mark for the Orioles heading into 2025 is the starting rotation. So on tomorrow's episode, we'll break down what the options look like right now with Grayson Rodriguez on the injured list, where the Orioles could upgrade, where the depth is, and how this all fills out after Zach Eflin, who was named the opening day starter. But that's all coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.